Good morning, I'm Connie here at Red Pine Quilt Shop in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. Have you ever had a friend ask you, would you help me sew a quilt? And it can be a really fun project or it could be a disaster. I have some tips for you on how to help that non-sewing friend sew a small quilt and enjoy it. So I have 3 tips. The first one is keep it simple. Then build some skills, practice using the tools, and finally, avoid those hassles that we all know can happen and troubleshoot before you start. Let's go back to keep it simple. That is really on the pattern. Helping your friend pick a pattern that's going to avoid half square triangles and a lot of fine cutting, and also those points is key. Take a look at some of these. Some of these are table runners. You notice that many of them don't have really strong corners that have to meet. This 5 and dime, it has no corners. It would be a wonderful beginner quilt for someone. And the same with the 3 cards there. Now most of these are probably a lap size, a crib size, or like I said, a table runner. A pillow would be a great start. An added advantage is that you could start this and finish the top probably in one session with a little time out for lunch. So keep it simple. The next thing, it can be so overwhelming to choose fabrics. So go to a line. Let the fabric have the spotlight. Look at how beautiful these are. They're all coordinated. We've all gotten stuck picking out fabrics for a quilt top. Well, why not let the fabric lines do that for you? I would avoid really strong checks and graphics, because if you cut a little bit crooked, it's really going to show. Of course, pre-cuts are also excellent choices, depending on the pattern. So we've kept the pattern and the fabric simple, and we've avoided any of those really challenging piecing requirements. The next thing would be to build and practice some skills. Over the years, we've really gotten a lot of skills. We know how to use the tools and the notions. A beginner is not going to know anything. So let's talk first about using a rotary cutter and a ruler. These rulers do so much. There's a lot of information on it. But I could have my friend just cut some strips for me. And I'm using these sticky arrows to show that I want it to be at 2.5. I really like these for myself too. So this is a great tool to help them be more accurate. Another thing is as you're cutting, sometimes the rulers slip a little. Well, for those of us with experience, we kind of know how to counteract that. But if you're new, maybe these true grips would be a good addition on the back of the ruler. And of course, having a sharp blade will make life so much simpler. So first off, you might want to even talk with your friend about the selvage. If we're talking about someone who hasn't sewn since they were in school, that might be 20 or 30 years ago. Just assume they don't know anything, and then just go from there. So a practice. Musicians practice all the time before they have a recital or a concert. Why wouldn't we practice the things that we do when we're sewing? So the first thing for ruler work would be to line up the edge. Then I'm going to turn it around. And again, I think I might put my friends to work cutting 2.5-inch strips for me. I can always use those. So look how I can line this up here. I'm not going to be getting confused at all about where I need to be. And again, with a sharp blade and some grips on the back, easy to cut. Just let them do Well, as many until they feel comfortable. Ruler work can be confusing. So that's one thing that you would ask them to practice. And then a couple of tools that would help you. The next thing I would say as far as building some skills and practicing is the 1/4 inch seam. Now I know people call these different things. I'm just going to call them leaders. Have some little scraps where the friend can just start in the middle. We've all had trouble where the needle and the fabric bunches down, and it's so frustrating. So just start with some sort of a leader and have them practice sewing 1/4 inch seams. Just sew some. Again, a little practice on some scraps. They're going to have a lot more confidence when it's time for them to actually sew their top. And while we're here, a lesson that I need to remind myself about all the time is pressing. Now, I don't have the iron on hot here, but set the seam, you're pressing, not ironing, and then open and press to one side. We know this, but if you're a newbie, these might be things that you're unaware of. If the last time you sewed was in home ec, you probably were pressing the seams open because you were making clothes. So 1/4 inch seam allowances, use these little starters, leaders, and then pressing. And when you're pressing, you really can tell where my seams straight, did they get a little crooked? Take the time for some scrap practice. So I've got the rotary cutter, ruler work, 1/4 inch seams, and pressing. Now finally, I'd like to talk about avoiding hassles and troubleshooting before you have problems. Use your own sewing machine. That's my take on it. I know how my machine works. I know how it reacts. If the thread bunches up, I know how to clean it and all of those things. It might be fun to use your friend's machine, but if they're not a sewer, there's a chance it's been sitting in a closet for 5 years or more. I just like to use my own machine. I know what to expect, and in my opinion, it helps the project go along more smoothly and a better product at the end. Another thing, again, limit the tools. They don't need to use every notion that you have in your sewing room. You know, keep that together. And finally, when you're choosing the fabrics, label the binding and the backing and set it aside. It's so easy to cut into those, and then when you're ready for it, you find out that you don't have any. So the backing and the binding, cut it, label it, and set it aside. I would like to talk one idea about binding. You know the usual binding, you will go around, finish the quilt, but let me show you kind of a hassle-free way. I have folded it like this, so I'm going to have an angle. And then I sewed just this part until I could have done it another inch. And then I folded it and started where I was. And then I would sew around like you attach the binding. So let's just jump to the other end. When I get to the other side and I'm ready to meet my beginning, I would sew and then tuck this into my little fold and sew across. Sometimes I like to sew like this, and you're going to be meeting that seam you made in the beginning, and then lay it down and sew again. Now this folds around nicely. Again, this is a scrap. It's a practice. I know that many of us like to do the one where you have them meet and turn and do the diagonal. It looks lovely and you can't tell where you started and stopped. But for someone who hasn't sewn a lot, this is a pretty direct, foolproof way to have your binding start and stop. So I hope that you and your friends can have a really fun time sewing, and who knows, maybe this one project would begin a quilter's life and they would go on to do more. So just keep it simple, do some practice and skill building, and then troubleshoot. Use your own machine so you know exactly what you're getting into. Thank you for watching.